Welcome back to Twin Tech 2020. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm excited to introduce a new segment that is very much post-pandemic or during pandemic, who knows, and that is a time zone dependent segment, something we're calling Linner. Lunch in the United States, Canada, Latin America, dinner in Europe and Africa, and gosh knows what in Far East Asia. Probably we're all asleep at this point. But in this time zone constrained world, we're breaking out of those constraints, and we're joining two of my very good friends in Copenhagen, Denmark, Afton Halloran and Roberto Flore. So Afton and Roberto and I met at H-Farm probably about 5 years ago. And if you were with us this morning for our trip around the twin world, you met our friends at H-Farm in Italy. And we met because Roberto is a fantastic chef and I was hungry. And so since that first meeting, Roberto has introduced me and many others to a variety of foods that, let me just say, we might not have tried had it not been for Roberto. But both Roberto and Afton are deeply engaged in food system transformation. So what I'd like them to do is briefly share what they're working on these days and then talk about how that relates to food system transformation around the world. So Afton and Roberto, thanks so much for being with us. Afton, let's start with you.
Thanks a lot for inviting us. And yeah, so my relationship to food systems transformation is as a consultant. So for the past 3 years, I've been independent and working with different companies, governments, international organizations to help them find kind of the entry points that they're using to basically improve either health or looking at environmental sustainability through food. So that could be with policy, for example, or it could be through innovation agencies, or it could be looking at production systems that are novel and innovative. So those are some kind of concrete examples, but again, I would call myself like a cross-pollinator to stick with the kind of nature theme, and really working to connect the different players in the food system.
Great, and you also have a show for the Nordic Council about innovation. Tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, so for the Nordic Council of Ministers, which is the representation of the 5 Nordic governments and the cooperation between them, we have a podcast called Nordic Talks. And basically this podcast looks at different approaches to reaching the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we connect ideas from the Nordic region, what's happening here, to other parts of the world and how those same issues are being dealt with, let's say, in Africa, Asia, North America. And it's fascinating to see that there are many commonalities in terms of how we actually are addressing these big global challenges.
That's great. We'll come back to that later on. Now, Roberto, before you introduce yourself, I should share with everyone that you're my good friend from Sardinia. And so you're taking a very relaxed Mediterranean sort of position on the screen with us, and I love that. So tell us a little bit about your work and what you're up to with respect to food system transformation.
Yes, thanks, Rob, and thanks a lot for having us on studio today. So basically, my work related on food system transformation is taking the angle of how do you change a food system from academic perspective. So I run a food system change laboratory inside of the technical University of Denmark, and we work with engineers, and we basically train engineers to think systemically when it comes to food systems. So basically, imagine when you are developing new technologies, we push people to think deeply on the human needs of that technology. And for us, food is something that is really strongly connected to something that is human field, and sometimes engineers tend to forget that. And you say you met me 5 years ago when I was serving you some weird food, and that's for me is really important to keep in mind that sometimes the perception of food could be weird for many, but at the same time could be really traditional and comfortable for many others. And so, how do we deal this in a research setting? It's sometimes there is the tendency of forgive this element. My role is to bridge that gap between rural communities around the world and hedge innovation that take different areas in an engineer ecosystem.
That's great. And just for context for everyone, the Danish Technical University is essentially the MIT of Denmark, one of the leading research institutions in the world. And you helped to found the Food Innovation Lab at DTU. And also for context, when you mentioned to all of our Twinians that food that might look a little bit weird, I want to defend myself. Number one, I did eat it. And number two, we were talking about worms or maggots, I believe.
It was a cheese that it was infested by fly larvae.
Yes, great. So a cheese infested with maggots, which it turns out is a delicacy in Sardinia. And I have learned through my travels that anytime someone says something is a delicacy in their home country, you should stay very far away from it. But I didn't. I trust you. And I have to say it was a very positive experience. So speaking of these food system transformations that you're both very engaged in, what I'd like each of you to share one story or one example of something compelling, unexpected, maybe surprising that you've seen or experienced or heard of, learned about with respect to food system transformation.
Okay, well, I think the story connects the both of us, the two of us, and it's also the story about how, Roberto introduced me to the same cheese that he gave to you. It's actually how we met each other.
Well, yeah, actually, Afton, thank you for bringing that up. Now that you've opened the personal door, maybe you should say how the two of you, I didn't share with everyone, you two are married. Despite being fed maggots, you still decided to marry Roberto, which is just extraordinary. And you guys are what I call a power couple. So tell us briefly, how did you meet?
Yeah, so I was working for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN in Rome. And keep in mind, I'm from Canada originally. I traveled to Sardinia to do some personal research to find this rare cheese that you can't buy on the market because it is infested by maggot larvae. And I got Roberto's contact information from a friend of a friend. And I showed up in a small town, and I got the cheese, but I also got the guy. It sounds like some kind of cheesy American film.
Okay, by the way, everybody, this is news to me. I had never asked before. I didn't know this. So, Afton, what you're saying is it was not Roberto that brought the maggots to you. It was the maggots that brought you to Roberto.
Yeah.
Well, that is the food system at work. That is the food system in action. Okay, so serendipity. So Afton, back to your story. What's something surprising, unexpected that you've learned through your journeys in food transformation?
I think it's that wherever I go, I'm invited into someone's house to share food with them, and that's how you connect to people. So the way in which, we meet new people is always through food. And I think that, to me, is something that we cannot lose. And I think that's it's compelling because if we start to talk about how we're transforming food systems, let's say maybe through digitalization or through other ways, we have to keep in mind that human aspect that Roberto was talking about, that we convene over food, we meet over food, we share food with our friends and our family, and that's how we connect. And I think for me, seeing that occurring around the world, it just shows again and again that this is extremely human, and it's basically a language in itself. So I think that to me is not necessarily surprising, but I think it is compelling in the work that we do to show that it's not just about the environment, it's not just about human health, but it's about human beings and connecting.
Human connection. So maybe, do you have any insights? I mean, we all feel that, but do you have any insights as to how we've navigated that through this pandemic, where we're together in a world apart? Where right now, for instance, how have you seen people able to navigate and maintain that human connection over food, even in a virtual space?
Yeah, definitely. We know people who have virtual dinners with their families from all corners of the world who are sharing recipes. We're as a part of the Kinner network.
Even with the Kinnernet friends.
That's true.
We had this, and that has been kind of like really. It was social glue between us, right? It was kind of like keep really tight the group, and that was fantastic. But
great.
For me, it's really fascinating. Also, those layers experience that you can have through food. It's so, sometimes something that is really simple, like a tomato, can have so many layers of complexity through, you can talk about one ingredient, you can talk about hours from, the value chain behind tomatoes into, the history of how tomatoes travel the world, or like how tomatoes in the hands of an alchemist became tomato sauce, right? And so that's kind of like really fascinating element of food that can take us back into human being evolution, and I really want to always know more about that ingredient, because it's endless, the thing that you can learn about. It's and that's why for my point of view, I moved from the initial position of like being in a research setting into the gastronomy world, entering into more.
And Roberto, just to clarify for everyone, when you say a restaurant, it wasn't just any restaurant. This was one of the world's greatest restaurants where you worked for some time. Yeah.
So basically, I have a really multi-hat career development. I grew up with this idea of working with food systems and being really attracted by working with food, and I studied agriculture, and then I moved into the side of like restaurant business and production. And when I moved here in Copenhagen, I was leading the research and development for an organization called Nordic Food Lab, which was basically the research open source research laboratory of Noma, which has been several times the best restaurant in the world. And
best restaurant in the world. I mean, that must be some place to spend a little bit of time. So so food is always interesting to me because of how visceral it is, and how the experience, as Afton was pointing out, brings people together. Let's look back at your heritages in Canada and Sardinia. How do those heritages inform the way you approach food system transformation, your work today?
Yeah, so from my side, I grew up in the countryside, and grew up where my family grew a lot of our own food, and to me, that was just very normal. And then when I moved away, started university, I had to pay for zucchini for the first time in my life, or I think of rhubarb, because to me that was just like a currency between neighbors. All of a sudden, I felt like, wow, not everyone has that experience. And, it was in a way naive, but at the same time was a real eye-opener to the fact that, food for me was the path and the trajectory that I definitely wanted to continue on, and also to bring people closer to the food system in different ways, not only through, how they consume, but also what they're purchasing, what kinds of things they support. And then for you, you have similar kind of background.
I have similar background. My original town counts maybe no more than 2,000 people. I come from this little town in Sardinia up to the mountains. And this is something that, I grew up really in this kind of iconic image of me going around with my grandma, foraging and having these amazing stories of hearing how she survived during the war, collecting wild herbs. And so for me, it was really interesting to see this in my development career as well, entering, for example, in the field of culture, and then moving from something that for someone was a resource in a really harsh time into entering into a pest that everyone needs to control, right? And so I've been always entering in these double side levels, and today one of the big goal of the lab is actually operating towards the mission of leaving no one behind, and being part of such an environment put me into this perspective of how we acknowledge that there will be people that we take care of, and how do we make sure that we are going to create the right innovation for all these type of categories that are existing at the same time in the world. And this is why we are so overgoing on also topics that connects us with Africa. Yeah. So we are based in Copenhagen, but we are so much out searching for international collaboration as well, trying to engaging with this type of communities, which I feel part of as well.
Great. Well, on that point of engaging, we're glad you're here with Twin, as we are glad that everyone's joining us. But specifically on this point of engaging food system transformation, as many of you are aware, Twin has had a Twin Catalyst around the food and agriculture industry. This is an attempt to bring people from different industries, not just food and agriculture, who, by the way, traditionally have not communicated with each other very much until recently, but also healthcare, medical environment, et cetera, because as we'll talk a lot about during our finale on the 24th, it's a series of complex systems that interrelate, and we have to work together to achieve nourishment for 9-10 billion people by 2050. So Afton and Roberto, we would be pleased to welcome you to the Twin Catalyst and engage with some of the many organizations and stakeholders that are part of that movement. You're a dyad. I often look for dyads. You are a dyad. You're a power couple. How does that dynamic, and I know that Roberto can get a little bit annoying sometimes, Afton, but how does that dynamic inform your work and your life, that you're kind of in the similar space, but you're also life partners? How does that dynamic work for you?
Well, I guess to be a little bit like to get the unserious things first. I mean, I think we take our food very seriously. So actually going to the supermarket is like a big outing. You know, it's going to take quite a few hours to actually debate what we're going to buy and all the different criteria that we're looking for. But more seriously, we really like working together, and I'll let you also answer that question. But we a lot on research projects. We coach each other in the work that we're doing because, you know, Roberto's going to give me a perspective that, you know, maybe I'm missing. And I think having that complementarity in a relationship it's only been positive for me. And I think I'm much better at my job because I have this kind of sparring partner that I can come home to.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And Roberto, how is the sparring partner for you?
I mean, it's been so far amazing. No, I love it. It's been this time. I mean, after now we're several years together, and we've been enjoying this ride since the beginning. You know, with this crazy cheese. But we have shared so many interesting stories coming from the field. You know, traveling to Thailand, traveling to Africa. Traveling to Mexico, and we have always had this kind of fil rouge of food as a strong element, and then us wearing different hats, from the funny part to the more deep scientific perspective, and I think we really have this complementary position. So it's also for me. I've been learning a lot from Afton, and it's.
Well, I advise people often to find others who complement them, that they can become very close to, trusted relationships. You don't have to go so far as to get married. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But having those kinds of close, trusted relationships to challenge each other and be a sparring partner in a healthy and wonderful way is quite powerful. Now, Afton and Roberto, we're inviting you to join the next segment after we conclude here, which is called Share Your Mission, Change Our World. This is a segment that all of our Twinians know quite well. We've done it since the very first global event in 2009. And in this session, what everybody's going to do who's with us today is go on the hop-in on the sessions link on the left-hand side of your screen. And when you go to the sessions link, I'm going to ask you in a little bit to find an open room. And by open room, I mean look for a room with no more than 5 people. So once it gets to 5 people, it closes. Go find another room. Now, once you're in that room with 3 or 4 other people, here's the drill. And you're going to be with other Twinians who already know the drill, so they can guide you through it. But the drill is you're each going to share one mission objective purpose important to you. It could be personal, could be professional, could be anything that is important to you. And then the other 4 people can only do two things. They can ask clarifying questions to make sure they understand the mission you're talking about. And two, they can offer to introduce you to people who might be able to help you with your mission. Now, it's really important to understand that we're not allowed to talk about the missions, to work on them together, to give advice. Please do that later. I encourage you to do that later. But instead, we are to engage with each other and share our networks of trusted relationships. That's what this social connective twin is all about. And by the way, it makes life a lot better place. So in order to illustrate for everybody, Afton and Roberto, I'm going to put you on the spot. In less than 2 minutes, you have to be able to articulate one mission objective for us right now that we Twinians might be able to help you with. So who would like to start?
Okay, I'm starting. So for us, it's really about, our mission is to create much more positive future scenarios about the food system. So we both been talking about this, and we think that the future is painted in a very dystopian way when it comes to food. And so we would like to see many more brighter futures painted, and to understand from different perspectives what that would look like. Because I have my own scenario in mind, and so does Roberto, but it's important to also look across the world and to understand what that means in, let's say, in Africa, what that means in Asia, what that means here in Europe, in different communities. So for us, that was probably, the most, the most important mission right now.
And also challenging, from my point, we've been talking a lot about this as well, like challenging the concept of what is efficient in a food system. How do we build this with a more social efficiency perspective instead of like just scaling efficiency perspective? Because we are entering in this situation where we know that population is growing. We are all saying that we need to grow more, but at the same time, we are wasting 1/3 of the food that is produced already. So how do we change this concept? Because there is something that is not working, and we need to really readdress the idea of efficiency from our broader perspective.
Great. So I totally agree, and I'll offer you a twin connection, and that is to Scott Bowman, who leads the Twin Catalyst for Food and Ag. And I'm quite sure that whole community, thanks to our great sponsor, Griffith Foods, can help, and will be very interested in those objectives. Food is a currency between neighbors. Food brings us all together. Underneath, food is absolutely essential for all of our survival and thriving in the world. It is as well a multi-layered experience. One of the reasons I asked Afton and Roberto to be with us is to share their personal stories. People connect to personal stories. Oftentimes in business, in government, and other complicated environments, we try to over-intellectualize. We draw up the spreadsheet, we create the plans and the Gantt charts, and we miss the human connection and the human story. And anytime we're trying to generate massive change, if we aspire to solve these SDGs over the next decades, we cannot do it through math alone. We have to make it tangible, digestible, and connect with the humans who are connected, because ultimately that's how we amplify purpose. Afton and Roberto, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else, please go and meet us in the session rooms for Share Your Vision, Change Our World. And last thing, come back here at 1 p.m. Chicago time for a great session with Peter Bryant, Julie Hill, and others around the purpose of business. Trust and the purpose of business. Thanks a lot, and thanks again, Afton and Roberto.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.